Hi, and welcome to the Just Go Up Climbing podcast. I'm your host, Finn. Kind of what got me psyched on starting a podcast was climbing media, climbing films, trying to have conversations about recent climbing media, keep myself more informed about the space, trying to have conversations and point people towards what I felt was good climbing content. I might try and branch out into other conversations, things I might have something to add to. I think for now, we're just going to do our best to stick to a weekly schedule where I kind of talk about maybe the 3 to 10 what I feel are the most important, or at least worth watching climbing films of the past week, and just share a few thoughts, kind of say why you should watch them, maybe why you shouldn't watch them. And with that, I think we'll just jump right into it. So the first film I kind of wanted to talk about was Anna Hazelnutt's re-release of her Peace film. I had never seen the original. Obviously, I'd seen the video posted on, I think, Reddit. I think seen some Instagram posting about it. But I just never really gotten around to watching it. Obviously, Peace, a very historic climb, a very beautiful climb. Anna went on to not only ascend the climb, but first ascent an extension, which then extended into the Bagrierian to take the climb beyond a single pitch and to fully summit the dome. As a little background, the reason she re-released the film was someone who watches her content wrote his own score for the film. He rescored it. And I felt like the film in general was just going to be... It was obviously, Peace is like a very difficult climb. It's an incredible climb, but I feel like the point of the film is always going to be about the aesthetics, how beautiful everything is. And I felt like, if that much intention had gone into the score, then it was probably worth a watch. And I think, upon watching it, upon reflecting, that I can say that that's very true. It was a gorgeous film. It sounded amazing. It looked amazing. I think, honestly, if more film resources had been provided to this could have been an amazing addition to like a real rock cycle or something. It was, the storytelling was all right. I definitely think with more time, it could have been really turned into an amazing story. And as it is, it's gorgeous. It sounds amazing. I'm trying to think of climbing films that kind of keep up with this one on that both visual and sonic medium. And I'm sure they're out there, but I'm just struggling at this moment. So I think if you just want to watch a very aesthetic climbing film, one that's like very peaceful, very calming, very inspiring, very beautiful, I think this is definitely a must-watch. I think one thing that's obvious through the film is kind of Anna's ethos around like climbing. I've heard content with Anna on it, podcasts and such in the recent past where she discusses like using less violent, less colonizing language around climbing, and how her desire to pursue climbing is kind of rooted in a much more like symbiotic relationship with nature, a much more tranquil and peaceful and inclusive dialogue around climbing. And I think that's very obvious from this film. No matter how you feel about that, I think it's something that can definitely be appreciated, especially in the context of a route that's this beautiful and a soundtrack that's this good. One other thing I kind of wanted to talk about in relation to this film was there was a climbing magazine article, I think that got released a couple months ago, discussing the relationship of the terms pro climber and influencer, and specifically in relation to how a lot of stronger women who climb, who have fairly large social media followings, are more likely to get called influencers relative to their male peers who might be more likely to get called pro climbers. I think, it's an article worth reading. There's some things in it that I agree with. There's maybe some things that I don't necessarily see eye to eye with the author on. I think it's worth commenting on how we've seen maybe a lot of climbers kind of take the route of being a pro climber and becoming an influencer. And I maybe won't name names here, but there's definitely a few that I can think of who, got very big off of doing some very hard climbing, being very big in the climbing scene, and then going on to attract fairly large social media followings and kind of see that become their main revenue stream. And I would qualify those climbers as influencers. I don't think it's necessarily unfair or derogatory. I think we often use influencer as a more derogatory term in the climbing space, and I think that's probably worth having a conversation about. I don't necessarily, agree or disagree with that idea, but definitely like some interesting things to be said there. What I will say is I think Anna is kind of a rather unique example. Not unique, but definitely a rare example than the pro climber to influencer pipeline. I would definitely say she's on the influencer to pro climber pipeline, that when you kind of think about like what climbing she pursues and the specific style that she pursues, she's definitely a very elite climber in that space. And I think it's worth, you can like look at her content. It still kind of has an influencer-esque feel to it, right? She produces a lot of YouTube content that's like, a gym session with the girls and whatever, which again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. I enjoy kind of having background session content playing on YouTube while I'm working or whatnot. It's not necessarily something that I'm going to pay attention to, but it has a space. It's entertaining. It's fun to watch people climb. But at the same time, you'll scroll down her YouTube channel and she'll be sending Peace, or she'll be sending To Bolt or Not to Be, which I think are definitely climbs that when you're specializing in that kind of lower angle discipline and you're sending everything, you're pulling hard and you are representing your brands well, that sounds like a pro climber to me. So I guess it's just kind of worth reflecting on the path that she's taken. I don't know Anna at all. I've never met her, but it seems like she's made a lot of sacrifices and trained very hard and climbed very well to get there. And she's not entirely unique in that space, but it's definitely kind of opposite, I think, of the way we see that path go, and kind of puts her in a unique place in that discussion around, are we calling these climbers influencers or pros, and what's the difference, and where in that spectrum do you have to fall to be one or the other? All right, kind of moving on from that conversation, the next video I wanted to talk about was from Lines. I don't know that I can pronounce this name. It's a video of just a couple of folks from their crew just crushing V10s, V11s, and Font. The main climber that they focus on in the film is Lucia Dorfel, which isn't a climber that I was really following, but she's an Olympian. She's climbed Hazel Grace, she's climbed a riverbed, an absolute crusher, obviously, someone to watch. But the main reason I wanted to talk about this film, or just mention it was beautifully shot. Holy cow. They managed to take what I imagine are some above average looking Font boulders. I've never been to Font, but decent looking boulders, and just the angles that they're finding, the film quality, the stability, all of that. They're just some of the purest climbing porn that I've seen in quite a while. It looks very good. And I think if you're just looking for some good looking climbing footage, something to just sit on the couch and watch for a few minutes, and be like, wow, I wish I was climbing on that boulder, this is definitely a movie for you. Next up, there was a Mellow video this week. Daniel Woods sending a new 14 in Switzerland called the Dark Passenger. It's very easy to complain about Mello. I think it's kind of popular. It's something I do all the time. It's something the folks that I talk to who watch Mello kind of complain about all the time. Kind of bringing that skate aesthetic to climbing it's cool. It can make for a lot of cool content, but sometimes it doesn't really end up selling the experience and selling the boulders very well. And I think this is an example of that. This is definitely one of the more weirdly paced and weirdly edited Mello videos I've seen in quite a while. It's like you get halfway through the video and it feels like the intro just ended, and then it's immediately into like the high stakes part of the video, right, where there's like a time limit and Daniel has to send because his flight's leaving. And so it's just like you don't really feel like you build that relationship with the climb, build that relationship with the climber. There's just not really enough time for that. There's a lot of more interesting artistic choices, shall we say, just like random shots of an abandoned village and like close-ups of Daniel. And it's like, you know, I think anyone who's been watching climbing films for long enough has made extended and passionate eye contact with Daniel on many occasions. So I think if you're looking for like a high quality storytelling climbing video, you can maybe pass on this one. But if you're a Mello regular, you like the style, you just want to watch somebody send something really hard, obviously this is a must watch for you. One thing I will say, the holds on this climb look incredible. It's a very beautiful climb, and it's definitely got some of the cooler holds that I've seen out of a Mello video recently. Just some of that gorgeous Swiss granite. So if you want some climbing hold porn, this is probably a good one for you as well. Next up I wanted to talk about was Wheel Rock, them setting a hard indoor boulder about V14. You know, I love Wheel Rock. They're probably one of my top 2 favorite climbing channels out there right now. I'm pretty much always going to sit down and watch as soon as they release a video. I'm pretty much always going to want to talk about it. I think the highlight of this video, kind of like the cool, interesting part, was just getting to see kind of the setting and forerunning process. Maybe from, you know, I don't think the Wheeler brothers have a ton of setting experience, which is maybe evident, but obviously they're both extremely strong boulders. And it was really cool to see the setting and forerunning process behind like setting a boulder that's just kind of on the edge of possibility indoors. I think as a route setter, that's good to get a perspective on. It can be so difficult to tell, like setting beyond your limits, like what goes and what's impossible. And any perspective you can kind of get on that, especially into a higher amount of detail like these guys provided, that's definitely very helpful. That being said, definitely bottom 3 videos from these guys. Sorry to say. I think off the top, kind of only maybe one of their moonboard vids and the woodsboard vid are worse than this. It didn't really do it for me, to be honest. It's not that compelling of content. Even though I love Noah and Ben's dynamic, it didn't produce the greatest video. And that's okay. Not everything has to be a banger. One last thing is, oh my god, somebody buy these guys a gimbal. You know, felt like you're going to get motion sickness or something, which I'm sure is just Ben having Parkinson's or whatever. But moving on to the next one, I guess my last main film that I wanted to highlight was Trango Climbing, debriefing their Battle of the Block Season 2. I think what Battle of the Block is all about is basically Trango takes a set of their holds out to a few different setters, and the setters kind of have a time limit, and they're trying to set a competition level block. And I guess like the point of it is they're competing with the other setters in the season to, one, just win the audience vote, but to create like the most useful competition block for the use case that Trango is providing. First thing I'm going to say about this video is if you are a route setter, you're somebody who has deep conversations about route setting or just deep conversations about movement, this is definitely like a sit down, no phone, must watch video. I think the conversations that they have in this video about movement, about like forerunning, about tweaking, are some of the best, some of the highest level that I've seen in a video in quite a while. It really gives you perspective on what those high-level conversations can sound like, how you can take a visual assessment of a climb and then develop critique and then verbalize that critique. You know, as a route setter, I think this, for me, is a very good example of what I would like to see discourse around route setting, discourse around setting hard climbs, and discourse in comp setting look like. This is like identifying core issues with the boulder immediately and how to address those. I think you're going to struggle to find better conversations out there than this one. Overall, just great insight into the climbs, great insight into the process, great insight into the tweaks that need to happen, how to create movement, what the general needs of comp setting are. So just moving on to the end of the podcast, I just wanted to shout out a few other videos, maybe ones that didn't present anything too revolutionary. I just describe these as good background content, stuff you kind of are just having on in the background while you're working, general inspiration content, something you can kind of turn your brain off to and just enjoy. I think the first video I kind of want to shout out is The Ring from Badwater Bouldering. Obviously, Badwater Bouldering, some of the most consistent uploaders out there of decent climbing content. You know, you're never really going to see anything too revolutionary out of these guys. You're never really going to see maybe the highest numbers go up, but they're just going to produce pretty consistent, solid content of pretty dang good lines. And this one's no different. A guy and a few sessions on a pretty sweet looking V10. And just kind of hanging out, kind of a vibe of, you know, he's trying to send and you're just like hauling pads and being a spotter or whatever. Just kind of that cozy vibe at the boulders. Second video I want to shout out was Tension released the 12th episode of their Spraywall series. Tension, probably one of my top 2 climbing channels out there right now with Wheel Rock. You know, I think their Spraywall series is good, solid content. I think if you're psyched on board climbing, it's probably pretty sick. I definitely am pretty psyched on board content, but, you know, it's episode 12 of them climbing on boards. Nothing too crazy in this one. Nothing that happens in this one is really going to change the world. Definitely good content, solid climbing, one that's worth watching. But again, nothing too revolutionary. The last one I wanted to shout out as just solid kind of background content was this guy named ZP Climbs. He's got around 2,000 subs. He just had a board sesh, released a YouTube video, called it "You Should Only Train on Steep Walls." It's basically just this guy flailing on some steeper 7s and 8s on the kilter board, which, you know, I'm definitely someone who kind of appreciates not always seeing like super duper hard boulders going down, you know. This guy is probably at about my level. It's just fun to like kind of be on the same level as someone. He's definitely got a good vibe, brings a good energy to his videos, and it's just kind of chill bouldering content to relax and study to. But yeah, thank you for sticking around. Thank you for listening to the first episode of the Just Go Out Climbing podcast. I appreciate you getting this far. Let me know kind of what I can do better. What can I do to improve the podcast? Any segments, any content ideas? I should have my email in the description for either the podcast or this podcast episode, so feel free to reach out to me there. I would love any sort of constructive feedback that you can provide. But yeah, thank you for listening and have a good one.